So Jérémy Larmi is here with us today to discuss about how to reconcile HR and with the digital era. First of all, you need to be aware that he's an entrepreneur. He is also well known in France because he's a very successful startupper in the HR field. He is also, and you interrupt me if I forgot anything, he is also the founder of the Lab HR, so very well known in France too. And just to give even more legitimacy to the reason why he's here today, he's currently doing a PhD in cognitive sciences. So now you know many things about him. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you. The way I talk about innovation is through HR, because I believe human resources is the key of organizations tomorrow. You'll always find money, you'll always find ideas, project organizations, but people is the scarce resource of tomorrow. And when I started realizing that, back in 2012, probably most of you knew it way before me, I'm still young, I decided to do something about that. And I have sort of a life mission. My life mission is to promote a future of work that is inclusive, ethic, and optimistic. And that's why I carried out my PhD in cognitive sciences. This PhD is about understanding better and getting together three concepts that are really well known from HR, but really badly described: intelligence, skills, and performance. Basically, when you recruit someone, that's the thing you want to look about in a way or the other, depending on the definition you have for each. So I started looking at this, and I realized that actually all the definitions we had, all the understanding we had about this topic comes from sociology or psychology. But to understand it really properly, it comes from neurosciences, how the brain works. And just let's take intelligence, for instance. You have a lot of definitions of intelligence. So many definitions that there isn't any definition like on which everyone can agree on. For the 20th century people, intelligence is about IQ. Someone that has a very high intellectual quotient is intelligent because his brain goes fast. Einstein and Ribéry have an intelligence that compare. If you take the strict definition of intelligence as of the 20th century, intelligence in the 20th century was defined as brain power. And actually, Franck Ribéry needs much more, really much more brain power than Einstein to do what he's doing on a football field. Because he needs to calculate like the trajectory of the ball, position his body. That requires a lot of calculations. And then shoot the ball at the right angle, the right speed, the right power. And all of this requires an amount of calculations that is hardly done by a machine today. And Franck Ribéry can do it. So, okay, maybe Franck Ribéry is not smart intelligence in the way we all think of intelligence. Like, he cannot speak properly, let's say. But he's really got brain power, more than Einstein. And that's what intelligence is about, the brain power and how you use it. Let's say Franck Ribéry is a boat. It's like a huge engine, but in a boat. And Einstein has a huge engine, but in a car. And the society we live in is more a road than a lake. So society is better for Einstein to prove his intelligence than Franck Ribéry. But then comes professional football. That saves Franck Ribéry. And you have several types of intelligence. It won't be the topic today, but it is to me an introduction. Because what I found out in my PhD is that all of this comes from one very specific part of the brain. And this part of the brain is most of the time stopped. But when you are looking at me while I am talking, of course, it's a bit more impressive for me, but Except that what's happening is that actually you're decrypting all of my body language at the same time as I'm speaking, meaning that you get the full message, not only what you're listening to. And the way you use the resources of your brain to get knowledge and to learn is the key of our added value in the 21st century. All of this happens in a part of the brain that we call the prefrontal cortex. So your brain is divided into several areas, and there is a small part in the front of the brain, right here. It's very thin. It's like 0.2 millimeters. It's very, very thin. It's actually, let's say, 10 centimeters out of 5 centimeters. So it's a very small zone, like a very small layer somewhere here in your brain. And this is where your intelligence comes from. It's actually a maestro for your brain. It actually coordinates all the zones of your brain to tell them what to do and when to do it. And that's the part you're using to learn, to interact, and basically to act. So what I'm trying to do here is to make sure that your prefrontal cortex is telling your brain to focus on everything I'm saying, including the body, with my body language. Because, as you know, my words only represents 7% of the content of what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure that from now, almost everyone knows about that, because it's becoming common knowledge. But it's true. It's true. Words only represent 7% of the content of a message. Body language is all the rest, in intonation and all of this. Basically, let's say that in the brain you have several areas, but you have two areas that are very important. This one, that is, let's say, the adaptive brain, and another one that is the standard brain, the lambda brain. And this part is called the parietal cortex. Parietal cortex is about everything we already know, everything we already master, everything we already manage. Typically, you're in a supermarket, not the place where you're the most adaptive. You're sort of in an automatic mode when you're in a supermarket doing shopping. And then you go to the cashier, and you see two cashiers. On one of them, 6 people waiting. On the other one, 2 people waiting. Automatic mode, 2 is better than 6. So you're going to the line where there are only 2 people. And when you're there, other people come behind you, so you're kind of blocked. And you realize that the 2 people that are in front of you, they have huge trolleys. Huge trolleys and bags of coins. And it's going to take forever for them to pay. And all the others just have a sandwich, and they're going to pay way less. So what you're telling yourself at this moment, oh, I should have been more cautious. Next time it won't happen again. Why? Because at this very moment you're learning. You're learning because you did a mistake. That's basically most of the time how we learn. But you're learning because you did a mistake. And this mistake was not analyzing properly the situation, but thinking you were right. That's what we call a cognitive dissonance. That's when you're pretty sure you're right, but you're not. And this happens when you have patterns in your mind and you're so used to use them that you don't even challenge them anymore. And you use them in your everyday life, and it goes okay until it doesn't. And we're living in a world where everything you see around you is changing. All the conditions are changing. But most of the time, your patterns, your inner patterns, haven't changed. And you'll need to make a mistake to understand that. So if you're aware of that, and if you work on your cognitive dissonances before they happen, then you can actually adapt before making the mistakes. So to make sure that you're coming from there to there, you need like a shock, something to wake you up. Like when you come in your company in the morning, hello, how are you? And you? Like, every time. The person doesn't even answer. If you look at the situation from the outside, say, it makes no sense. Say, hello, how are you? And you. And no one answers. Everyone is okay because it's like a formula. Everyone's okay with this. But now, let's say, hello, how are you? I'm not fine at all. I'd like to talk about it with you. Suddenly, something happens. You wake up. You wake up and say, oh, yes, but I have this meeting right now I have to go to, sorry. You need to adapt at this very moment because something's happening. It's not a usual pattern. So unless you have always the same colleague that in the morning tells you that is not fine. But then it's okay, you can deal with it. But at this very moment, what happens is what we call a cognitive shift. Your brains goes from there to there. And at this moment, now you're smart, because now you can adapt. When you're there, you're not smart, you just know things. So this is how the brain works. And when we're speaking about the 21st century and everything that goes right and wrong, but everything that goes with it, that's what we're talking about. This might be a long introduction, but for me it's important for you to understand how the brain works, because I really think that in a few years, it will be very hard to do HR without doing cognitive sciences. You know that digital is coming. Like winter is coming. The digital is coming, and it does change a lot of things. It changes the way we work, it changes the way we think, it changes the way we create value. During the 20th century, the way for people to create value in a company was to follow processes. Build processes, follow processes. And that worked well. I mean, in a very industrial era, it worked really well. Except that now, if you build a process, your process may last 6 months, a year, but then it breaks. Because people that follow the process will make mistakes. Because the environment is changing a lot. There are a lot of parameters that are not fixed anymore, that are changing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that all the things that we can do once and then repeat them again and again and again are not the property of humans anymore. If you can do it once and then repeat it, it means that you can program it. If you can program it, a machine can do it, probably better than you will, because if, for example, you know perfectly how to look at a CV, I'm not saying that a machine can today, but if you know how perfectly to look at a CV, and you have to look at 200 CVs, after the 20th CV, you might become a bit tired and lazy and not look at everything. The machine won't do that. The machine will look the 200 CVs with exactly the same process. And in that way, the machine will be better. If we consider that the machine can take into account all the parameters that the good recruiter would, which is not the case today. But my point is to say that everything that is standardized, everything that is a process, can or will be done by a machine, sooner or later. Meaning that our added value as humans in a company is not about following processes, it's not about repeating things. It's about doing things that do not exist, doing things that are not planned, not processed, meaning creating. So that's what we call the 21st century skills. That's the very core of my PhD. What are the skills we need in a digital era to keep creating value in organization and more generally in the society? 4 main skills or competencies are necessary to create value in our modern world. Actually, these skills were very useful before too, but before following processes was enough. It is not anymore now. And these skills are called the 4 C's, for creativity, critical thinking, communication, and cooperation. In other terms, it's your ability to learn, think, and interact. Basically, school as we know it is preparing students to know things. Meaning that, as of 2018, it is preparing students to compete with a USB key. That's what standard education is about. making sure that students know things. For those who know education outside of France, and for example, in England or in the US, it's a bit more human-centered. You learn to become someone before just to know things. And maybe, yes, people know less things than we do in France, because in France we're a country of experts, nation of experts. But you learn much more about personal development and about self-awareness and all these things. The point is that creativity is not just a word or a process, it's a mindset. Creativity is a mindset, and companies, as of today, do not have the mindset to encourage creativity. Most of the people ask now, we need creative people. We want to recruit creative people. You will recruit creative people, but the organization is not prepared to welcome creative people. So they will disorganize your company. And most of the time, you will either make sure they get out of the company or they will leave by themselves because they don't fit in the system. And creativity is not about fitting in the system, it's about challenging the system to find solutions that have not been found yet. That's when critical thinking comes in. Solutions that are relevant and that actually create value. Solutions that create more value than they destroy value. Because when you all know Schumpeter, but it's really hard to create without having to give up something, to be polite. Meaning that if, I'm not saying that is the case, but if tomorrow or in 5 years or 10 years, you want to build a new LVMH based on new principles of creativity, of autonomy, of long life learning, I don't know, all the things that are very trendy today in some companies, you'll see that it is very hard to create a new world without getting rid of the old one. I really believe that HR is the core function of the company tomorrow. I don't believe it will be with the same people. Unless people adapt, of course. But HR as it worked during the 20 last year, I don't believe this is the future. I'm pretty young and I did not get to know the period in the 70s. But a lot of people that were HR at this time told me that HR was very different in the 70s. Because what we're living today already happened, actually. It happened in the 70s. For example, in French, the word compétence did not exist before the 70s. It appeared in the 70s. Before, people were using the word qualification, qualifications. Qualification au poste de travail. And that's the word that was used. And in the 70s, that's when IT appeared in the companies. And that's where industrial companies had to completely shift to make sure they would be still alive tomorrow. For example, Danone, that was producing glass, and that became one of the biggest food producers in the world. Some strategists in the organizations have realized that actually to make sure the company would stay competitive within the 5 or 10 next years, it would need to lay off about 30% of the people and hire some others, but with completely other skills because of robotization, because of all of this. And it's really hard to fire 30% of your workforce without spending a lot of money and without a great social cost. So companies start to think. They start doing a bit more forward thinking. And this forward thinking is what is being called strategic workforce planning. Strategic workforce planning is about anticipating the need for skills. Let's say that you know how your business is going to move, to evolve in the next 2 years. And you know that you will need that many skills in every field. You will need, let's say, 2,200 full-time equivalent for data analysis. You will need that for every skill. And on the paper, workforce planning is great because you do that, and then you do the other part, which is what do I have today? What are the skills I have today? And then you fill the gaps. You see, okay, so tomorrow, there are all the skills that I don't have yet, so I have to source them. And there are all the skills that I don't need tomorrow. They'll be obsolete. So what do I do with these people? So that's when the role of HR is getting rethought. HR tomorrow, I mean, it already is today. It's just not structured like that. But HR tomorrow is just a function of skills sourcing. Anything you do in HR is about skills sourcing. It means sourcing on the short run, the medium run, and the long run. Recruitment is a short-term skill sourcing. Training is a mid-term skill sourcing. Anticipation, workforce planning, all these ways are long-term skill sourcing. And actually, the role of HR is moving that way, but centered on skills. And when I say skills, I don't mean expertise. Expertise is one thing, but you also need skills for expertise you don't have and for problems you don't know yet you have. Meaning that you will have to attract new skills. That will be employer branding, that will be recruitment. Meaning that you will have to develop skills. That will be learning and development. That will be mentoring, that will be leadership, that will be all the things you have about L&D. That will mean retain skills. So meaning that you want people to stay in the company, or if they don't stay, you want them maybe to come back one day. So that's recruiting, and that's also ambassadors program, and that's everything you have about all the perks, all the things, comp and ben, everything you have to actually retain people. But I'm not talking about people now, I'm talking about skills, to retain skills. Because what makes a people interest for a company is the skills this person has. Not only the expertise, once again. It can be all his personality, everything. Let's summarize that with skills blocks. And so, attract skills, develop skills, retain skills, but also anticipate skills, anticipate the need for skills, because that's when you actually create value for the company strategy, when you're able to anticipate your need for human capital, for human workforce. And the fifth one, that is to me the most important, and that is the most not neglected, but less structured, is activate skills. Meaning that if you have a lot of great skills in your company, but you don't make sure that they're used 100%, then you didn't really do your job. Because your job is not only to make sure you get skills, it's make sure that these skills are used. All this framework is coming slowly, but it is reshaping HR function. And you see, all the functions you have today will be useful tomorrow. It's just that they will be orchestrated in a different way and centered on the use of a skill and the ability to source this skill. You'll be able to master it, but what will make the difference of HR? That will be everything that you cannot process. Meaning that sometimes to retain someone, you can't just have the grid of comp and ben and say, oh, see, yes, the grid say you should be happy. No, it's trying to make the difference as a human, to actually spot all the weaknesses of the system and use empathy, use cooperation, use communication, use creativity, critical thinking, to actually make sure that the system is properly working according to its objectives. And that's the HR functions of tomorrow. And I believe that the 21st century skills will be very useful in the human resources function, because that's where you will need the most to be, let's say, a differentiated human compared to a machine.
So thank you for this disruption session. The objective of today was really to open your mind, to raise your awareness on different ways of thinking the future of HR. I hope that you liked it.